This episode is brought to you by Midwest Night Watchers, found everywhere on your favorite podcast platforms.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to a special Piercing the Veil, at least early afternoon for us.
And happy Mother's Day to all you mothers.
Yes, happy Mother's Day to everybody. So we are going to be talking about giants and angels with Mark Olly. If you guys have not heard of him, he's from the UK and he's a established author and online personality, and even done some TV spots and stuff for a lot of shows you'd probably know. So we'll let him talk about that when he gets up. But we're doing 2 p.m. Central, so a different time for us, just because of our guest in the UK. We're trying to make it convenient for them since we're like a 6-hour difference.
Yeah, we don't expect them to be on at midnight.
So hopefully people will find us today at the different time, even though we posted it in our groups and social media. You know, everybody's probably used to us being at our certain time, but hopefully everybody will find us and watch the replay. Maybe, I don't know.
Oh, I bet they will.
I bet they will too.
Yeah. So welcome in, everyone.
We got a few people popping in already. Look at, they're finding us.
Yeah. Yeah, because I see Demaria, Denise, we got Sober Carper, Blazer, and Gary, and we saw Joe. So yeah, welcome in, everyone. Thanks for joining us early.
They're slowly finding us. Well, I think we should just go ahead and get started. We'll just bring Mark up and we'll let him introduce himself after we talk to him for a minute, and hopefully he'll share out where to reach him and all that good stuff. So we'll just bring him up. Hi, Mark. Welcome.
Hi, Mark.
Welcome, America. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's fantastic. Thanks, guys, for going on at this time. Because, I mean, once you get to sort of midnight with the 6-hour difference, I don't function when we get past kind of midnight, you know, the early hours.
That could be a fun show too, though.
Yeah, but for all the wrong reasons, I can assure you. Oh dear. Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's great. You know, it's great to be on a new show as well. I'm speaking to new folks in a new part of the United States. You know, it's amazing. Yeah, thanks for doing what you do.
Yeah, thank you. We have a few UK followers, but like you said, when we do our normal time, it's real late for you guys over there. So they kind of watch the replays, I'm assuming, unless they just get up in the middle of the night and say, "Oh, you guys are on."
Well, yeah. Well, I'll spread it far and wide. So hopefully you'll pick up a whole load of new folks from the UK, hopefully, with a bit of luck.
We were talking before we went live, and you mentioned that you've been on Ancient Aliens and a spot on Coast to Coast, and you have quite a few books out. You want to tell people about that real quick?
Yeah, I mean, keep the publisher happy. That's the first thing, you know. Let's get that out of the way. Let's do the advertising. Anybody wants any of my stuff, go and have a look on Amazon. My name is down in this corner here, Mark Olly. Type that into Amazon. You should get probably 9. I think there's 9 books out at the moment. There's one on King Arthur. There's one on Robin Hood. There's one on Crystal Skulls and Human Heads. There's one on the Ninth Legion, the Green Man. The last one I had out was one on a UFO crash over here in the UK, Europe's Roswell, 40 years since impact. That's important because we have pieces of whatever it was that crashed. You can see them in detail in that book. So it's not an enormous book. It's a dead easy read, but definitely encourage you to go and get that one. And the King Arthur one's not bad if you're into your legends and history and archaeology. That's a good read, but they're all on Amazon. Go and find me on Amazon. That's dead easy. Click, collect, next day comes whizzing through the door. If you want to see what I've done in way of television, YouTube, go and have a look on YouTube. I think I'm right, it was Ancient Aliens season 20 episode 2, which is the one on crop circles, was the one I was on a couple of years back. So that I'm on there somewhere, but there's loads of other things. I have my own TV series called Lost Treasures, here in the UK, which aired on Sky. That was back in the early 2000s. All the episodes are up. All the extra documentaries are up. There's about 30 episodes of that out there. So go and have a good binge watch of that. It's about 20 hours of me, if you can put up with that. That's loads of fun. And then if you want to come and find me, well, I don't do all this fancy social media stuff. You know, I'm clearly old. I'm on Facebook. Just go and find me on Facebook. Send me a friend request or whatever. I was saying earlier, as long as you're not like Fifi Trixabel with a butterfly and a rainbow and no photos, you know, I'll accept you. If you're normal, I'll just accept you, you know. But like I say, if I can't recognise you and you've got nothing on your profile, I'll not accept you. But if you're a real person, come and find me. I'd love to chat and catch up with you. So that's it, really. Amazon, YouTube, and Facebook. You know, it couldn't be easier, could it? Really.
Awesome. That's fantastic.
So did I hear you say? Did I hear you say crystal skulls?
Yeah, the Crystal Skulls and Human Heads is the book that's out there.
Wow.
It looks at these stretched heads, you know, and all the crystal skulls around the world and what have you. You could do a show just on that. I mean, there's a whole load of content there. And I've been doing that for a long, long time. I started researching that about 15 years ago. So that's an interesting book. And it covers, you know, when you're watching archaeology and history and they say, oh, we found a new species of human being. You know, it's DNA out in the middle of, you know, Israel or the middle of Romania or wherever they're finding it. And everyone's like, species? Did I hear him say species? What's this all about? You know, well, it blows the lid off that. I think we're up to about 30 odd different species of humans now. So if you're into your fossil humans as well as these stretched heads, and it does touch on aliens as well, you know, that'd be something we could do in the future. That's quite an interesting
I like those subjects. Well, we've talked a little bit about crystal skulls, you know, but we haven't really done a show on them. But I used to watch like Arthur C. Clarke that talked about crystal skulls and all that. And In Search of Leonard Nimoy, and they did crystal skulls and all that neat stuff. That's the subjects we like touching on. Well,
one of the ones Arthur C. Clarke showed, he showed a photograph like that, and it had the Mitchell Hedges skull in the middle, and then there's all these other, I think there's 11 other skulls around it. Well, the bottom left-hand one I've got in the room next door.
Really?
I own one of them. I own one of the crystal skulls.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
So he's sat in the next room.
Do you talk to it or get information from it?
Well, it's an interesting skull. I mean, when it came to me, everyone said, oh, his name's Jason, you know, and it showed me where it was on the photograph and all that. But I find that the skull just feels comfortable. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know, maybe it's been all around the world. It's, you know, it's toured, it's met thousands of people. You know, it's been a really active item, a really active artifact, and it's one of the few that you can tell are real. You know, it's handmade, you can tell where it comes from. You know, it's clearly Aztec. You know, it's a proper little gem, but it just feels really comfortable because I'm an archaeologist, so I've got a house full of stuff like that. You know, it feels really at home here. So yeah, I don't necessarily get specific messages from it, but I do take it out on conferences. You know, people have picked it up and handled it, and they've had quite a blast from it. You know, it's not quiet, it's not dormant, and it's beautiful. The way it's carved is beautiful. It's milky quartz at the back, then it's clear quartz diagonally through the middle, and then it's smoky quartz at the front. The way they've done it, the way they've carved this crystal, they've not just gone willy-nilly, you know, and haywire with it. They've actually followed the the different colors in the crystal. So if you get it up close, it looks clear when you first look at it, but up close now, and there's rainbows in the middle of it and all sorts. It's
Wow.
a nice little skull. And the qualification for crystal skulls really is that they need to be life size. If they're not life size, chances are they're not one of the originals. You know, they can't be tiny. And this one is bigger than child size, so it's a decent size.
Wow.
You know.
And it said there's 13 original skulls, right? Is there 13
Well,
that
that's
communicate with each other? That's what the story is.
Yeah, the 13th skull, I think, is the Mitchell Hedges one, and there's supposed to be 12 others scattered around the world. And the ones they brought together for Arthur C. Clarke were the ones they knew in the 1970s. Obviously, there's been a few others since then. I found some when I was in South America, so there are a few others out there now. So maybe they just didn't bring the right ones together. But wow, you know, yeah, let's do a night. Let's do a night on those.
Yeah, we'll have to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tonight we're going to be talking about giants and angels, and I really don't have any specific information on that other than what we've found. And me and Jane talks about. You know, we've both been raised in the church, so obviously the giants and angels come up in text in the biblical terms, and we kind of look into that subject. So I don't know where you're at on this subject.
Well,
I just thought it was going to be interesting.
Yeah, a bit of background might help there, because way back in the 1990s, I actually trained as a vicar. So my background is biblical. I'm in the same position, really. So I'm kind of the classic. If you think of the old Victorian antiquarians, you know, most of them were vicars. Most of them had a bit of spare time. They went off and did other things. Well, I'm kind of that, and an archaeologist, and also a rock drummer as well, but that's a completely different story. But yeah, I'm coming from the Judaic, biblical, Christian background, but also I know quite a lot about other stories and other connections. That's what archaeology does. You know, the Babylonians, the Sumerians, and all the different, you know, the Book of Enoch and all that sort of stuff. I know quite a lot about that as well. Yeah, do you want me to start off with giants? You know?
Yeah, let's just
both
go down the road wherever it takes us. Yeah.
Yeah, because they're kind of both related, but at the same time, they're both different. I mean, they're related in the sense that they do crop up in the same writings. You know, they're both biblical, and they both seem to be around at the same time. They're also both clearly in existence before we are. You know, they predate us. They you know, our times. They're obviously ancient. I'm thinking giants. Giants are interesting because they are. I'm almost going to start and go backwards, because the last time they get mentioned in the Bible, you're talking the David and Goliath story. Everybody knows about, you know, there's little David with his, like, you know, shooting sheep, slingshot, and he fires this stone and it takes this giant down. People don't realize, by the way, those slingshot balls go at 160 miles an hour. They're like bullets. So if you know exactly how to flick a slingshot, you can take somebody down very, very easily. They're absolutely deadly. So yeah, he takes down Goliath, and this huge, enormous, you know, 30-foot tall bloke just goes bump, and that's it. That's what most people know. But what they don't realize is he was part of a family.
Right.
The scriptures actually tell you he had brothers. You know, the race of Anakim, which is what he was part of, there was a king, and the king's bed was like, whatever it was, 34 foot, 35 foot long. It describes this guy's you know, accommodation and how he used to live. There's another one of his brothers that has 6 fingers and 6 toes. And when you start looking at them as a race, you kind of start to realize, number one, they're isolated, and number two, that is showing signs of inbreeding. So they're almost the last, if you like, of a species. I'm doing both here. I'm being biblical and archaeological, you know, scientific as well as spiritual. It's like they're the last of the species that lived in that particular area, you know, in the Middle East.
Right.
That's where they were. But they're dying out. And the thing is, they're dying out in about, maybe say 1,200, 1,300 BC, which is not that long ago. Not in archaeological terms, you know. It's only like yesterday compared to the fossil records, you know. I mean, the Babylonians, the Sumerians, you're looking at 7,500 BC. They're way back. So in biblical terms, the David and Goliath thing only really happened fairly recently. You know, that's relatively recent history, and they were still there. They were still wandering around among us. The other thing that annoys me with the giants is people go, well, maybe they were just big people. Maybe you're talking about 8 foot, 9 foot, 10 foot, which, just makes them big. Well, yeah, we've got 8 and 9 foot people. You've got the Maasai tribesmen, you've got Robert Wadlow, who grew to very nearly 10 foot tall.
Yeah, he's from our home state.
There you go. There's a Chinese lady who's called, I think she was called, well, it's her and another bloke called Chang. Both of them grew almost to 9 foot. They were very, very tall. And back in Victorian times, that's big. That's really big. Right. They are huge people. But they're still not quite giants. And the other thing as well is actually thinking of Robert Wadlow, because while we're on sort of local ground, how do we know that what we're regarding there as an illness, how do we know that that's not the last of a genetic line? We've classified it as an illness,
right?
But what happened if there was lots of him? Loads of people like that. You wouldn't think of it as an illness. So I wonder if you look, people kind of label giantism as an illness and a disability. What happens if it's a throwback? Nobody's really been able to answer that. And it was a bit naughty because when they buried Robert, they buried him in a block of concrete. You can't dig him back up. There's no way of going back and having another look. He's buried in a block of concrete. You can't get at him at all. So they shut that door completely. Whoever it was that buried him just shut the door. But then as you start to go back, there's quite a few giants. They mentioned in the Bible all the way back as far as Noah's Ark. And maybe they help to answer some of the questions. Like if you've got a bloke who's 35 feet tall and he's absolutely massive, then you don't have any problems building any of these huge buildings, things like the pyramids and all that. Because you've got a team of people who are, 10 times the size of you. If it's a species, and I think it is a species, then there's no reason why it wasn't on Noah's Ark. I mean, I know a lot of people are going to go, hey, there wasn't any space. How are you going to get a pair of 30 odd foot, giant humans on that? Well, you don't. You take the kids, don't you? You take the children. And how do we know they didn't have genetic technology back then, like the technology we've got now? You don't. Maybe you don't even need to take them as people. You take them and then recreate them. But it does actually say in the Bible, it says that the Enoch, the sons of Enoch, the Anakim, are descended from the giants that survived the flood. And there's I think it's 88 flood stories all over the world, and almost all of them mention that there are different species of humans there. Some of them actually do mention the giants, that they survived whatever this flood was. Do you want me to crash on? I can go even older.
Very, very.
Let's go even older. Go on.
I'm sorry.
That's right. Go on.
We've had some giant reports, here in the U.S., coming up from whether South America into the U.S. or like the Kandahar giants.
Yeah. There was a publication I was getting in the 1980s, and it reported archaeology of all places. I think it was archaeology in Saudi Arabia. Very rare. You very rarely ever hear anything of Saudi Arabia. You do from America. We are aware over here of America, and in Saudi Arabia, they'd found these coffins, and they are cut out to fit the bodies. So, you've got a head at one end, it narrows down to the feet at the other end. They're all covered in blue tiles, but the body cavities are all over 30 feet. They had a whole cemetery full of them. And then it appeared, this one report appeared, it was 1984, this report appeared, and that was it. You never heard anything else after that. Wham, the curtains came down, that was it. They didn't want to tell you about it. So they've got them over there as well. They do crop up. Be very wary of what you see on the internet, though. It really annoys me because people go nuts with the CGI, These blokes with little hammers, digging up skulls that are the size of a bus, It's not real. None of that's real. The other thing that annoys me actually is the Book of Enoch. What people have done, there is in Genesis, I'm going to come clean on this, there is a tiny reference, and it's 2 little verses, and it says, the sons, the angels came down and had intercourse with the daughters of men, and then what most people say is, and they produced a race of giants. That everybody's quoting that.
Right.
That is like the number one big biblical quote. Well, actually, they're two different references. They're separate references. They're in the middle of a list of stuff in Genesis, and one says, and the angels came down and had children with the daughters of men. And then there's a gap, and then it says, and at that time, the giants were among them. So they're not related. You know, the whole idea of angels coming down and producing children and them turning out to be giants, those two references, the first reference comes from the book of Enoch. Some Bibles come clean. If you go down to the reference at the bottom, you know, they all put little references along the bottom where the verses come from. Some of them have got Enoch for that first one with the angels coming down with the daughters of men. Occasionally, I think it's the Revised Standard Version and the New Revised Standard, at the bottom it actually comes clean and says it's the book of Enoch. So you've got all these Christians going, hang on a minute, book of Enoch? What's that? That's not on our list. You know, where's that? Well, if you actually go and have a look, there's about 5, I think, or maybe 6 different versions of the book of Enoch. And the oldest one is about 400 AD. So it's an old book. Don't get me wrong. It's an old Jewish book, but it's still about 300 years after most of the rest of the biblical material. And it actually, the oldest surviving copy is about, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years after the book of Genesis. But clearly it's been around a while. And that's what people have done. They've got hold of this little verse, and they've got all these like giants running around all over the place as products of, you know, angels intermingling with men. Well, in the book of Enoch, it does say that a race broke free from whatever dimension this race was in. This, I'm paraphrasing this. They break free, they descend, they come down onto earth, where they are regarded as angels. And the book of Enoch says, you know, they taught man, you know, medicine, writing, magic, all sorts of stuff. This is what Enoch says. And they did produce a race of intermingled beings. But the problem, and this is now we're drifting slightly into a different subject here. The problem is angels have no requirement to reproduce. In fact, the Judaic-Christian view is that they don't even have genitals. They don't reproduce at all. There's no need for them to. They're eternal, everlasting spiritual beings. That's what they are. Yes, right. They can pop up in the form of men. They appear. In fact, they can appear to actually be so close to us that we don't recognize them. I think there's a Bible verse somewhere that says angels walk among you and you know it not.
Right.
They're really good at disguise. You know, these guys are a whiz at disguise. Unless, of course, you're Ezekiel, in which case you've got, you know, seraphim and cherubim and eyes and, you know, wheels spinning everything. They can put on a good show when they want to. But most of the time, they just look like us. And they don't have any reason to reproduce. So that is a contradiction. So what on earth this group of beings were that came down in the book of Enoch, they were something else. You know, they're somewhere not quite in the angelic realms. I mean, Enoch, I think actually the origins for the book of Enoch, I would say, is probably Babylon. I think it's Babylonian mythology, and that would explain how it's crept into Genesis, you know, as an idea. You know, that's what they were thinking of. Somebody in Babylon had told them about that. So good old Moses, like he always was, you know, oh, yeah, I'll write that. I'll put that in, you know, just put it in as a throwaway verse. And that's what he's done. But it's caused havoc. It's created havoc. You know, there's like whole bookshelves written about the Nephilim and the Nephil. And, you know, oh, they came down and they did this, that, and the other. All that means in Hebrew, that word that's in the Old Testament, all that means, a Nephil or a Nephilim, is a mighty man of valor. That's what it translates as. It translates as a pretty kick-ass warrior. That's what you're looking at. You're looking at, you know, some big dude, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger or whatever. That's what you're looking at. That's all it means. It doesn't mean, you know, some giant 30-odd foot tall, you know, whatever, interbred hybrid. That's not what that word means. It's been stretched way out of its linguistic context. You know,
wow.
They've gone for the most obscure they possibly can. So, well, I've kind of drifted there. I've done 2 for 1, because you've got angels, and that's what angels are, and you've got giants, and that's what giants are. And if you look at the history of angels, that seems to support pretty much what I've just said, because of the way they behave and what they do and how they appear. And, that's angels. That's what they are. That's one class, one enormous class. If you read Revelation, there's thousands of them. It's just an enormous class of spirit beings, interdimensional beings. And then you come the other way and you go, okay, well, what about giants? Giants are very physical, down to earth, touchy-feely, solid. They're out there, and there's genetic evidence that they've been there. And I dare say there probably is genuine archaeological evidence as well. Like I say, I mean, you look at some of these huge, enormous buildings that have been built. We can't do that. We can't even do that with modern day technology.
Right.
Some of the blocks, I mean, Baalbek, that's another story. Some of the blocks they've got out there, they've got 300-ton blocks, and they're halfway up walls. And people are looking at them going, how the hell did that get up there? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, if you've got a whole team of people who average, between 30 and 40 foot in height, that block is suddenly a lot smaller to them. It's easier to do it. I think that's what we're missing. I think, all these archaeological mysteries and what people are seeing is an extinction process. It's not what we think we've got. It's actually what isn't there anymore. We're looking at the leftovers. So it's like, oh, how did that happen? Well, you're not going to get an answer for that, because the way it happened has gone. It's not there.
Right.
Your dinosaurs, your woolly mammoths, your giants, all the extinct species, they're just not there. We're living in a different world to the world that those things were put together in. That's a whole new subject, isn't it? Anyway, there you go. That's only the introduction.
Yeah, because when I put the show together, I was going off of Genesis 6. I was reading that, what we've always had as sermons, that the angels came down and bred with the women of earth and had giants. So that's how I got the image in the subject matter. But I know this is a vast information that we need to uncover. I mean, just recently I brought up the transcripts from South America from I think it's the Aztecs, where they taught the oral history to a Spaniard, and he wrote it down, and they said that the giants built the temples there in South America.
Well, it does drift. I mean, I mentioned that book I've done on crystal skulls and human heads. That's kind of where we came in at the beginning. It kind of floats into that, because if you look at the Paracas, now the Paracas are these huge skulls, these great, whopping, great big, huge things. They look like cone heads. They're huge. Well, if one of those guys was about, let's say he's about 6'6", 7 foot, which is a normal big fella, he's just a normal big bloke.
Right.
But then he's carrying this skull, but the skull's 1.5 foot. It's 3.5 times the height of a normal skull. Well, that's going to take him up. You're already adding, another couple of feet to his height. That's going to take him up straight away to 8 foot, 9 foot tall, if he's got one of these huge skulls. Right. So there are clearly other species of humans walking around that are enormously taller than us. Well, we don't know, because we weren't there, that we don't know if any of the South American tribes were the size of, say, the Maasai in Africa. The average Maasai warrior is over 7 foot. Well, then some of these skulls are going to take these guys up to 10 foot. And 10 foot is big, and little Spanish that are coming over there are only 5'6". They're going to be like, whoa, hang on a minute.
Right.
These guys are almost twice the height, which is frightening. There was a story, I think it's Magellan, one of the Spanish conquistadors. Magellan lands on this island. I can't remember exactly where the island is, but the island is populated by giants.
Yes.
Now you're only talking 500 years ago. This is literally yesterday in historical terms, and he's on an island full of them. And what he describes in Spanish in his accounts is that these giants are 30 odd foot. It seems to be a common factor that the level of about 30 feet, give or take a bit, the ladies are probably 25 foot, but some of the big blokes are 35 and upwards, They're clearly very, very big, exceptionally big. And people can't argue that Magellan didn't know how big people were, because he's effectively a modern-day Renaissance sailor. He's been around a bit. So that is a particularly important account, that one, because it's recent, when we're thinking about things, we always think in terms of ancient archaeology and lost this, that, and the other, and all the rest of it. But the guys with the stretched heads, they only died out in medieval times. The giants, I mean, if you go with Magellan, they were still here only 500 years ago, up to Renaissance times. You know, there's tall people all over the planet that are still alive, like the Maasai and what have you. I just don't think people have done enough study to gather that sort of evidence together. There are some writers out there who have, but you've just got to be careful, because there's as an archaeologist, it annoys me because nonsense creeps in. So like I know what was written in Genesis. I know what's in Genesis 6 because, you know, it's Hebrew, it's Jewish, it's written by Moses, it's Judaic. So if you actually look at it from a language point of view, you can separate out exactly what the guys were trying to say. But then if somebody, you know, comes in who's never done that and just reads it flat in an English translation, which, let's face it, is, you know, it's had the vowels added, it's transliterated, it's, you know, not the original language, they don't have the background. If they haven't done the study, they're going to think that's what it says, you know, straight away. But it doesn't. It's separated, you know. Then you get onto other things, because the reverse is also true. When you get into things like Job, if you read the book of Job, that's all about pre-flood. There's about 3 entire chapters there that just talk about dinosaurs. And that's like, whoa, you know, and there's no other way you can look at it. No other way you can look at it. So there is stuff in there that is wow. But, you know, it's almost like, you know, smoke and mirrors. They want you to look over here, but they don't want you to look over here.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Interesting.
You know, you brought up an interesting point about the Spaniards being like 5'6", or, you know, average height, their normal height for that time period. And here in the U.S. anyway, you know, it seems like we had, like, our grandparents were like the 5'6", that range. And then us as grandkids or future generations have somewhat grown since then. So is that like an evolution? Not necessarily evolution, but is that like a thing that the human species go on? Will we go back to being shorter at one point, or will we keep growing as a race?
I don't know. I am a victim of that. I had to have a wedding photograph with my 4 sons, and I'm a paltry 5'8". You know, I mean, I'm just an average height. All of my sons are like 6'2", 6'3", 6'4". I had to buy a set of platform shoes for the wedding so that I was on the same height as the rest of them. Otherwise, you had like 2 there and then a drop, and then me in the middle, and then another 2. So I had to kind of, you know, bunk up to get on the level. So I am a victim of that. Now, I thought quite a lot about it, and I wondered, my mum's dad was over 6 foot, and my dad's dad was also over 6 foot. So I wondered if I got the short straw. You know, I come in at like 5'8", 5'9", because I'm in the middle. You know, I'm like, well, obviously I took out. My mum wasn't. My mum was really small. My mum was just, you know, 4 foot nothing. So maybe that had some effect on me. But then it's jumped. You know, it's kind of the rules of genetics. Very often something will miss a generation and then come back. And boys, it come back. In my family, it's come back with a vengeance, because, like I say, I've got all these enormous kids. They tower over me. But then, excuse me, my eldest son's produced grandchildren now, and I'm not sure they're as tall. I think it's gone back. I think they've reversed back a bit. I think little Ben, who's my grandchild, I think he's going to be about the same height as me. So I'm wondering if it's genetic ping pong. You know, we've not really got a handle on how genetics works.
Hit and miss.
Well, it's not hit and miss. There's a pattern. Like you say, generally speaking, the population is getting taller. So that something's going on. I think you're absolutely right. But the reason behind it, nobody's, like I said, nobody's really done a study of what that word giant really means, you know, from a scientific point of view. What is in our DNA? What is in our genes that has survived? There's a great example. Somebody found a child's skeleton in a burial, and it's Neanderthal. So now you're going way, way back. You're talking 50, 60,000 BC. But this little skeleton was really important because I think it's about 50,000 BC. In 50,000 BC, the Neanderthals are dying out. And this skeleton is both. It's Homo erectus, which is us, but the genetics are also Neanderthal. So the two species were interbreeding. Now, we know that happened because the Aborigines carry about 20-25% Neanderthal DNA. They still do. So clearly the Neanderthals must have woke up one morning and thought, right, we're doomed, lads. You know, we're not going to survive. Clearly we're not, you know, cut out for this world. Our generation's going to live out its life, but we need to leave something of ourselves behind. And I think it was a conscious decision. They clearly did it. The evidence is there. And I again, in the back of my mind, these little woodpeckers, you know, are tapping away. And I'm thinking, I wonder if the giants did the same thing. You know, why not? Why wouldn't they? Yes, there might be some kind of biological problem in achieving it, but yeah, why not? Why not somewhere in us? So back again to Robert Wadlow and Chang and the lady in China that was like that. And, you know, we call it giantism. But I don't think it's really been studied. I don't think that's been really looked at in detail from a genetic point of view.
I think that's ingrained in all of us. I think the human species wants to survive. So if you think you're dwindling, even our scientists today talk about, you know, how we're going to continue our species into the future, you know, what's going on with disease, health, all that. So I would assume you're right that maybe the giants knew the end was coming and had want to continue their DNA in. So what better way?
Yeah, I mean, one of the mistakes we make in modern times, and you've got to blame the Victorians for this. Anything in the 1800s, they were like, yes, we're the most civilized people ever to live. You know, everything. It's all about us. It's all about industrial revolution and progress and science, and you know, nobody's more intelligent than us. Nonsense, absolute rubbish. Because the people in the past are exactly the same as us. As an archaeologist, you learn that almost immediately. So as soon as you level the playing field, you start thinking, well, hang on a minute, Archimedes was an engineer, you know, Pythagoras was a mathematician. These blokes built pyramids and we can't even build them now. You know, we can't get our heads around them. So to some extent, it's every bit possible that these people were actually better than us, you know. And the Victorians had, you know, you look at the Victorian stuff and it annoys me because all these primitive, you know, they almost look like monkeys. You know, Neanderthals look like monkeys. They've got to, because they've got to be more primitive than us. And then I was reading a proper archaeological report the other day. They've got about 40% more brain capacity than we have. The gap inside the head is bigger. They've got bigger brains than us. Maybe they didn't do the same thing as us. Maybe they didn't think like us or function like us, but they had the capacity to. You know, so this idea that the past was somehow more primitive. I mean, over in America, I'm going to maybe touch a raw nerve here. I mean, I've got to say, Native American Indians, nobody could live in America better than the Native American Indians. They'd got it sussed. They'd worked it out. You know what I mean? And I know the people that have conquered America subsequently have tried to keep that under wraps. I've got books of underground archaeology that have been written about how advanced they were and what was found. And there's a whole tale to be told there about, you know, how the Native Americans dealt with what they were dealing with over there. And it's been marginalized. It's been pushed away. But again, it hangs on the definition of civilization. Of course, they were an advanced civilization. They could live in the same place for like 300 years, move, and you'd never know they were there. They'd just disappear. Now that, for me, that's like, wow, that's such an advanced civilization. Not like, you know, we do. We come into a place and we just destroy it. You know, we just fill it full of rubbish and pollute it and get rid of it. And, you know, so our whole idea, this Victorian idea that somehow we're more advanced, you know, because we've got science. And I mean, somebody said to me the other day, it's still on topic. Somebody said the other day, Noah up to the time of Noah's Ark, not only did those people live longer, so I mean, Noah's living to the grand old age of whatever it was, 960. You know, they've got longer lifespans than we have. Not only that, but to get from the starting point in Genesis to Noah's Ark, they had 3,000 years to develop their technology. We've only had 2,000 years to get to where we are now. So they were 1,000 years ahead of us. They were more advanced than us. You know, imagine what Noah's Ark must have been like. Forget this idea that it's, you know, timber box full of, you know, dung and smelly animals. It could have been a complete scientific experiment for all we know. It could have been pure science. You know, so the potential for the past, you know, it's peaks and troughs. It's not this idea that it was somehow more primitive.
Right.
It's incredible.
Well, you know, to that point, you know, if you talk about, say the Nathaniel, I can't even say it, so it's caveman.
Yeah.
If they're living at the same time as the dinosaurs, imagine us today trying to live in that environment. I mean, you wouldn't have to worry about sending rockets to the moon or all this computer technology. You just want to survive. I mean, just think about what it would take for that species to survive during that environment. I mean, that does take a lot of ingenuity and smarts to outthink your predators and enemies. And
well, it's the things we don't know. Porksley Riverbed in Texas is a great one, because when they excavated this level in Porksley Riverbed, they did it in 1935, so it's old archaeology. They excavated this river, and there's a set of dinosaur tracks going across this riverbed, and then there's a set of human tracks going across the riverbed, and you can see where this is going. I mean, the archaeologists were like, right, what's going on here? Is that the human chasing the dinosaur, or is the dinosaur chasing the human, or are they not chasing each other at all? Are they just side by side? You know, what on earth are we looking at here? That's the problem we've got. That bit's missing. If you look in the book of Job, I mean, Job says these dinosaurs, they could blow fire, they could talk, they were capable of communicating with each other and with humans. They were noisy when they moved. You know, there's details that are given in Job that archaeology is only just now discovering might actually be correct. You know, the voice boxes, for example, that you see in Jurassic Park, you know, where you've got velociraptors like talking to each other. The fossilized voice box is true. They have found them. So they were capable of complex communication. Well, they only found that in the 1980s or whatever, the late 1980s. But flipping heck, Job was written in, you know, with Moses wrote it in thousands of years BC. So you've got to look at it, and when you start putting things in chronological order, you start thinking, hang on a minute, what did they know back then that we don't know now, that we've lost? You know, some of the dinosaurs. I mean, I do this in another talk about dinosaurs. Some of the dinosaurs that were like chickens, and they went round picking stones up, and they had a gullet. They would collect these stones to grind up the stuff they were eating. Now, chickens do it. There's a lot of other birds do it. But the thing that's mind-blowing is the dinosaurs that are picking up these things called gastroliths are only picking up flint. That's all they're picking up. They're not picking up any other kind of stone. So immediately you're like, oh, how do they know the difference between one stone and another? Well, the other side of it is as well, you've got this enormous walking compost heap. The dinosaurs that are doing this are eating some really nasty pine cones and prickly, horrible vegetation, and it's rotting away inside them. And some of them have got vents in the top of the head to get rid of gas. So, you know, they decide they're going to break wind and get rid of the methane. It's not going to go backwards. It's going to come forwards. What they think is happening is the flints bang together, they ignite the gas, and the dinosaurs flame off. So we've got actual evidence now of dinosaurs breathing fire. So all of a sudden, the dragons are not fiction anymore. Dragons are a big issue because dragons go back thousands of years in mythology. So where did they come from, and why have they been around so long? Well, if you realize that dinosaurs have got these flints, these gastroliths, that they can spark and blow off, you know, whatever gas they've got, all of a sudden it starts to make sense. There's lots of examples like that out there, but that's something that we won't know because you can't get it from a rock. You know, if you're looking at a fossil, you're not going to know how that animal behaved. You know, it's difficult.
Wow. I can't imagine, though, a living thing being able to spark flint and survive a fire coming out.
Well, salamanders are supposed to be legendary fireproof creatures. There are some creatures out there that are fireproof. In fact, only today, and this I can reveal this exclusively, I was reading a paper about a deep sea exploration team, and they went down to the bottom of, I think it's the Marianas Trench, which is the deepest part of the ocean, and they were looking at some of the volcanic vents, and they sent this little sub into one of the volcanic vents and suddenly came face to face with eggs. So something is living down there in a volcano, and it's laying eggs. So whatever it is, you know, maybe it's a squid or a fish, or they don't have no idea what it is, but these eggs are alive. They're living and they're developing in a volcano vent. So if that's possible, you know, fireproof dinosaurs is a walk in the park, you know, absolute walk in the park. We're just finding more and more out all the time. You know, the number of dinosaur species, there's about, you know, 15, 20 dinosaur species being identified a week. You know, they don't tell you these things. You know, I'm a geologist as well as an archaeologist. I do that as well. And honestly, they're finding out some incredible things. Some of the things they've come out with recently, absolutely mind-blowing. But again, linking back into the topic, it seems to be supporting what we're getting from the biblical accounts. Moses actually was a bit of a dark horse, because what he did was he got a lot of what he wrote about, those first 5 books of the Bible, out of the libraries of Egyptian temples. You've got to remember, he's second to Pharaoh. You know, the whole, you know, Joseph's amazing technical dream coat and all the, you know, let my people go and all this kind of stuff, right, the Red Sea and all that. Well, that's the Moses we're talking about. So he is essentially, being second to Pharaoh, he's essentially able to go into every library in Egypt. Well, that's where the legend of Atlantis comes from. You know, that's where Solon got his information from in 750 BC. He wandered into a library in a temple, and they took the mickey out of him. They said, "Oh, you Greeks, you think you're fabulous, you think you know everything. You've got, you know, a couple hundred years of history. We go all the way back to 12,500 BC here, and that's only for starters." You know, so again, it's what's missing. You know, it's the gaps. Right. It's the library at Alexandria, and, you know, all these temple libraries, and it's, where did it all go? You know, why did we have to lose it? We are slipping backwards, you know, all the time. It's funny, actually, because we're probably talking about what the angels already know and what the giants used to know, you know, back on topic.
Right.
Those guys.
How do we gap the bridge?
I'm good at that. I'm good at making bridges. Well, clearly there's more going on than we know about, and, you know, we're kind of filling the gaps. I think, as I said earlier on, I think the giants physically, I think they were part of that prehistoric environment where everything was bigger. You know, we know that everything was bigger. You've got cats and bears and massive, great, you know, woolly mammoths and rhinos and, you know, flying creatures that are the size of Concorde, you know, all this stuff going on. So why would there not be a species of humans that was that big? Why not? You know, it's just how biology is. That's what we're discovering. You get something that's tiny and you get something that's absolutely enormous, and it's the same thing. They're all part of the same species. So that's kind of where the giants fit in. I think they're just the biggest version of us that there was. Yeah. How big they got, I'm gonna cap it at about 40 foot. I don't think there were any human beings that went any bigger than 40 foot. But, you know, if you're 40 foot and there's a 20-foot brontosaurus mithering you, you can punch its lights out, you know, because you're big enough to survive. You know what I mean? But that's what we're talking about. Talking about people living in a giant greenhouse with a load of big things that are going to get in your way and could potentially be nasty. I'm not so sure they were nasty, though. We're not entirely certain how the dinosaurs function. You know, even tyrannosaurs, which have these enormous teeth and what have you, there are some theorists that believe they were giant rubbish removers. They would eat anything that died, you know, that they weren't necessarily hunters. And I kind of lean in that direction myself. You know, if you're this whopping great big 60-foot high lizard, but you've only got tiny little arms, you know, what are you going to do? You can only wave at people with your arms. You're not going to go running after someone. You know, you can't grab them because you only got these little tiny arms. So some bits of it don't fit. They don't fit the narrative at all. Angels are another thing, though. Angels kind of, you're drifting into ET. You're drifting into extraterrestrial. You're drifting into, you know, if it's a little grey man with big eyes that comes towards you out of a light, and he's smaller than you, why could that not equally as well be describing an angel from 6,000 years ago? You know, it's more like a language problem rather than a, you know, what is this thing that stands before me? You know, it's how the human being is interpreting what they're seeing. You know, very recently, I think it's an Egyptian pharaoh. I think it's about 1,620 BC. this Egyptian pharaoh writes an account down, and he's keeping a record of his kingdom, and he says, and today we had big flying discs that came over us, and we have no idea what they are. And you read this, it's translated out of the hieroglyphs, out of Demotic's handwritten Egyptian hieroglyphs, and they've translated it, and it's like it reads like a modern day UFO encounter. You're looking at it, you're thinking, they've been around for a long time, these guys. They've been coming in. Ezekiel's whirling wheels, we mentioned those earlier on,
Right.
Like, sat in the middle of the desert, he's looking out across the desert. Here they come, flying across the desert, and they're wheels. Well, that's the only thing he'd know that he could describe. These things are flying in, and they're full of angels. They've got eyes all around them, but they're full of these beings. I'm only coming out with theories. I mean, these theories predate programs like the X-Files. They're way on back. They were there in the 70s. They were there in the 80s. These are early, very early, pre-Arthur C. Clarke. The early Eric von Daniken. You're going way back to that period with this as a theory. With Ezekiel's whirling wheels. There's the Wheels of Ezekiel, actually. I think it was Andrew Thomas wrote a book just on that subject. It's old ufology, but it's still good. It's still valid. And maybe what we're seeing, let's go really Skinwalker Ranch on you. Maybe it's interdimensional. Maybe we're looking at portals. Let's go down that route. Maybe these things are coming through from somewhere else. And why not? They're clearly not us. They're definitely not us. They can clearly do things that we can't do.
Right.
They're not limited to the physical environment in the same way we are. The thing that pops in my head, though, is, there's Mary asleep in bed, and there's the angel Gabriel. He pops up and he goes, hey, guess what? You're pregnant. Oh, you know what I mean? So what can these angels do? What are they capable of doing? They don't need to be physical about whatever it is they do. They just go, right, there you go, ba-bum, zap, done it.
I had never thought of that, and not to be blaspheming or anything, but what if Mary, the Virgin Mary, was abducted and inseminated by an extraterrestrial?
Yeah, you said it. I mean, what happens if she didn't even need to be abducted? Because she actually just says, doesn't she, in the account, she goes, I am the handmaiden of God, let it be to me as you wish, kind of thing, and if we're dealing with something that is not restrained by physical limits, the actual spark of life, they've photographed it now. They've photographed a sperm going into an egg, and the egg goes poof, and it lights up. The zinc, the famous zinc flare. Well, that zinc flare is light, light and life. So we're going so deep with that, And maybe that's what angels can do. Maybe they just go, whoa, here we go, zap, you're done. There you go. That's what it takes. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I was watching a documentary on the Turin shroud, because all the samples they took off the shroud are still floating around. They've got them in a cupboard somewhere, because they never throw anything away. It's knocking around somewhere. They decided they were going to have another look at the blood samples. So they analysed the blood samples off the shroud. And the two things that came out was, number one, the family, quote, family of that blood type are still living in Bethlehem today. And it's a race of people known as the Druze. The Druze genetically still have that same blood type that's found on the shroud. But the real, thing that makes your head explode is, you've got the XX chromosome and the XY chromosome, and it decides whether you're male or female. Yeah. Clearly, there is no doubt that Jesus was a bloke. Absolutely. That's it. He's a bloke. But he's only got Mary's DNA. The only DNA in the blood was female.
Wow.
And they only mentioned it in passing in this documentary. It was like, we just mentioned this, and it vanished in seconds. And I'm like, hang on a minute. You can't say that and just pass it up, So, yeah. So I was just thinking, well, maybe that's what you'd expect to happen, because there was no bloke involved. That happened through the agency of an angel acting on behalf of an enormous divine being, something that's way beyond us,
Right.
And I think we tend to forget that divine being, quite frankly, and I'm not being heretical, I don't think, in saying this, that divine being can do whatever it wants. Everything belongs to it. Everything does. Everything, wavelengths, light, you name it, life, whatever, belongs to that divine being. You know, everything is in that divine being, and that divine being is in everything. You can't escape it. That's the big message that the Bible brings, and a lot of other religions are saying the same thing, but in different ways, with different words. It's the same thing. So why not? You know, all those little human beings are running around on the planet going, oh, you know, that couldn't possibly happen. It doesn't happen to us, you know. You've got to go find somebody and have nookie with them, and you know you need little sperm and eggs and all this kind of, you know. No, you don't. no, if you're God, whatever your concept of God is, no, you don't have to go there at all.
Yeah.
These angels are, you know, we're back on topic. We're firmly on topic here. These angels are serious creatures. I've actually met one. Do you want me to tell you a story?
Yes, absolutely.
Have we got time for a story?
Oh, yes, yeah, we do.
You like this? Over here in this country, we have a big sort of Christian convention, if you like, and the Methodists go, and the Independent Methodists go, and the Church of England go, and all these different denominations go. And it's up in a little village out in the middle of nowhere called Keswick. It's up in Cumbria. And it's called the Keswick Convention. And I went to the Keswick Convention in the early 1980s. So I went with a Baptist church, another denomination. And we all went on this convention, and we all got there. It's a nice village, country lanes everywhere and all the rest of it. And we all met loads and loads of people who we'd never met before. So it was great. Anyway, picture the scene. It's the Saturday, couple of day convention. We're on the Saturday. We're all sat on a grass bank, and in front of us is a road, and we're sat in a circle. So everybody in this circle can see the road. You know, somebody somewhere can see all the directions. And then behind us on the other side of the grass bank is this enormous, huge 20 foot high holly hedge. So no one's coming that way at all. The only way anyone can actually approach us is up the road. And we're all talking about, you know, oh, is God like this? Is God like that? What about this in the Bible? What about that in the Bible? Kicking around the mysteries as well, like we're doing now. And then all of a sudden, this bloke just chimes up out of nowhere, and he says, oh, the answer to that question is, and he throws this answer in. And we all look around like this, and blonde hair, blue eyes. He's wearing like pale blue denim from head to foot. Even his shoes, I think, were denim. And he was just leaning there on the grass, you know, like that. And none of us saw him arrive. None of us. Got no idea where he came from. I mean, this is a proper 6 foot tall fella, you know, proper burly. I mean, he said he was American because of his accent, but to be honest, I know a lot of American accents. I don't think he was American. And he just basically, we had a couple of hours of discussion, and he was coming out with all this stuff that was absolutely bang on the money. And then he said, oh, come on, it's getting late. Let's go and get some lunch. So we all piled down the bottom of the hill to this little village hall. Over here, the village halls do afternoon tea. In England, afternoon tea is great. Tea and scones, brilliant, or scones. And we all piled into this village hall, and they've got all this food set out. And there must have been about, hypothetically, there must have been about 20 odd of us, maybe 28, 29 of us. And we all piled through. And this tall fella says, oh, don't worry about it. I'll sort it out. I'll see them right, you know. And these old ladies are piling food on our plates, and we all pile outside. And then somebody said, hang on a minute. Nobody saw him pay. How's he paid for it? I mean, contactless didn't exist. You know, you're talking about 1980s here. So me and another friend of mine went, oh, okay, let's go and see if we can work out how he's done this. So we went back into the hall, and all the food's back exactly where it was when we went through. I mean, you're talking about us eating a substantial amount of food, and it was all back exactly like we'd never gone through the hall at all. So at this point, we were like, there's something going on here. Anyway, it got to the tea time or whatever, and he said goodbye. He had to go somewhere else, and he wandered off. We met him again the following day on the Sunday. And it was the same kind of thing, chatting about stuff, and he was teaching and this, that, and the other. Me and this friend of mine, this is where it gets interesting. Both of us were determined to find out what was going on. And this guy, at the end of the afternoon, he said, right, I've got to go now because, you know, I'm leaving or whatever, the coach is coming, whatever, in the evening. We followed him up this road, and he turned into a back street between two sets of buildings. So you got buildings on one side, buildings on the other side, and very quickly at the bottom of this street was a railway embankment, huge railway wall. So you can't go out the bottom of the street. You can't do it. The minute he turned this corner, We ran as fast as we could up to the corner and stuck our head round the corner as fast as we could, and he'd gone. He'd vanished. And then we went down, and there was about 6 back gates to these properties, and they were all locked. There was nowhere for him to go. As the minute he went around that corner, with literally like a magic trick, within seconds, he'd gone.
Wow.
So I'm pretty convinced. You know what it says in the Bible? These, angels walk among you and you don't know it. Well, that was an actual encounter with a physical being that did not behave the way that physical beings should behave. We never saw him drink anything, and he never ate anything. He didn't buy any food for himself, and he didn't turn up with a water container or anything like that. He was just there. He was just there when he was there, and then not there when he wasn't there. Really, really strange. Another friend of mine, though, about 2 years later, he told me a similar thing, because I told this story. Obviously, I told it to the church, and he came up to me. He was a bass player in a band I was working with, and he came and he went, "I've got a similar story." He said, "We drove all the way to the top of there's this mountain in Wales called Mount Snowdon. It's the tallest mountain in that part of the UK. It's a really big mountain, and he'd driven up to the top of it, and there's a car park on the top. So he parked in this car park, and he had his 2 kids and his wife with him, and he said it started going dark, and it started going foggy. The fog started coming down because he's up a mountain and the clouds are coming down.
Right.
And he said he went to start the car and it wouldn't start. It literally said there was nothing, complete battery flat, wouldn't come on, couldn't put any lights on or anything. He said he was going into panic because he's in the middle of nowhere, And as he's trying to mess about, he gets a knock on the window, and he winds the window down, and it's a blonde-haired, tall bloke dressed in denim. And this bloke said, "Right, pop your hood and I'll get you started." So he pops the hood comes up, this bloke disappears under the hood, looks about a bit. "Have a go now, it should start." Turns the key, boom, car fires up. This bloke slams the hood down and goes, "Yeah, you'll be all right now." And just as they're going to drive off, this friend of mine thinks, "Hang on a minute, we can't leave this guy behind. He's up a mountain. Let's offer him a lift." So he backs the car up a little bit further, and the guy's gone. There's nowhere for him to go. He's on top of a mountain. There was no other vehicles there, nothing. He said they drove round the car park with the headlights on full, trying to find where this guy had gone and where he'd come from. He just vanished.
Wow.
But the description and what the space player friend of mine said was exactly it was the same bloke. And that happened in the mid-1980s. That was a couple of years later. So, they're out there. Trust me, they're out there. These angels do exist. I'm utterly convinced of that. But that got me really interested in angels. I've kind of been looking into them ever since. But yeah, that's a true story. That is a true story. Both of them are.
Do you remember anything that he said while you guys are having that conversation about biblical mysteries or questions?
Well, I was quite young in terms of having any knowledge of the Bible. I'd only started that particular path in 1978 because I had a spiritual encounter in 1978, which is for another day. We can come back at that on another day. But you could call it like a Damascus Road experience, a conversion or whatever. I was 15. I was a teenager then, just coming up for 16. But from 78 up to when we'd gone up to Keswick in 82, 83, I was still learning the ropes. I didn't really know anything. I hadn't studied the Bible or anything like that. I'd not looked into anything. And this bloke was just banging it out there like nobody's business. He was verse, line, exact location, knew where all the information was. He was coming out with verses that, you would never use in a million years. And the way he was doing it, you just couldn't fault him. There was whatever there was, 27, 28 of us. We ought to have been able to run rings around him, as a corporate body of young teenage Christians. We're all alive, all our brains are working fine and all that. Oh no, he flattened a lot of us, absolutely floored us. And he only looked like he was in his late 20s, early 30s. He wasn't particularly old himself. But every single word he came out with was just, I think somebody asked him, had he been to Bible college? And I'm pretty sure he said no. Well,
Angels don't have to go to Bible school.
No, of course they don't. Well, he's plugged in, isn't he? He's plugged in to, he's getting all his information downloaded. He doesn't need to carry it all up here. Absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal.
That's amazing. What do you got, Jane? Anything?
I'm just amazed.
I like the name Cairo. I like that. That's the early Constantinian symbol
It's
for
yep. It's I pronounce it
Christianity.
Tiro, but yeah,
Cairo.
it's Greek alphabet and it means Alpha Omega,
It's first two
beginning and
letters of
end.
Jesus' name. Absolutely. I wonder if
Hmm.
anybody else has spotted that. There you go. But yeah. That form of Christianity, the first, second, and third century, I'm particularly interested in that. I'm studying that at the moment. I'm looking into it. But I'm doing it in such a way where I'm also going a bit off piste as well. I'm off looking at the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi Library. They've just found the Gospel of Judas, which is like, whoa, Gospel of Thomas. I'm looking at all these extra bits of material that's out there. But there's one or two, if you know how to read them and what you're looking for, there's one or two little gems, bits that are popping up. I can feel a book coming on.
Yeah, we're into the Apocrypha, and I recently got the Geneva Bible and the Ethiopian Bible, and just looking into the old Bibles and just
Ethiopian
doing
ones,
some deep studying.
incredible. Yeah, that's insane. They've got so much extra material. They really have. Yeah, it's brilliant. I'm going there. I'm probably going to go there next. I think I'm heading for the Ethiopian Bible next, slowly. I'm just finishing the last of the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's a nightmare. Everybody goes, oh, no, they kept it a secret and the Catholic Church didn't want you to know and they hid it all. And, no, they didn't. They were just overwhelmed. They just completely swamped them. Your biggest jigsaw puzzle in spiritual history. And everybody wants it published yesterday. I have total sympathy with them. No wonder it took them so long. And now I'm trying to get my head around it. So I'm kind of in there at the moment.
Then like the rolls that are all together and they have to use the X-ray and the AI to figure out what's in layer by layer. That's cool.
That's coming next. They're the Pompeii scrolls. They're a Roman library that was found in Pompeii. They've got AI to actually translate the layers that they're producing.
Yeah,
I am so keen to see what comes up in that, because those scrolls will be leftovers from the library at Alexandria. They will be. There'll be surviving copies. Because the bloke who actually had them in his library in Pompeii was connected to the library at Alexandria. So I can't wait to see what comes out of those. That's like finding Leonardo da Vinci's lost books. Because he did 36 different sketchbooks and there was only 18 that have survived. It's like finding one of those, it's on a par with that. And we've got the technology to look into that.
Even if Alexander's library, even if that got destroyed, you would think there would be copies or original text or somewhere still spread out that we haven't found it, just like you're talking about the scrolls there. There's still got to be more. So maybe the information's out there. We just haven't found it yet.
Or if it has been found, and this happens all the time in archaeology, it's not a conspiracy theory, but somebody's probably put them in a box and gone, oh, where can we put these? Oh, I know what we'll do. We'll put them in the Vatican Library. So they disappear into 3.5 miles of Dexian shelving, and that's it. They're gone. They may as well have not found them in the first place. That happens all the time. All the time.
Like our giant skeletons that go to the Smithsonian.
Yeah, never to be seen again. Yeah, I've heard all about those. Yeah, there's a lot of. In the Victorian era, there were I think it was P.T. Barnum's traveling freak show or whatever. They had one in there. They had one of the giants there. There's fossilized giants that have been brought out. They've been displayed, like you say, in museums like the Smithsonian, etc. And then all of a sudden, all at once, before the First World War, they all vanished. Wham, gone. Yeah. I think that was that was probably an attack by the evolutionists there. No, we can't have those. Let's make them disappear.
It's kind of weird because not everything's all conspiracy. Sometimes it's just mishap. Sometimes it could be on purpose. Sometimes it could be information that they don't know how to identify it, or whether they might not know it came from Alexandria or was in a library at one time. And they think, oh, this is nothing. They just kind of toss it to the side.
Yeah, it's shoved in the back room.
Yeah. You'd probably be amazed if you knew exactly how many languages have not yet been translated as well. There's stuff out there that is clearly of great significance and they can't read it. It's that simple. which is a real shame. You know, some of the very early stuff, you know, the Mesopotamia and places like that, they're struggling. They're hoping to use AI, though. AI, you know, might just prove to be a really useful archaeological tool. I could see that, you know, bringing out a lot of stuff in the next few years. I mean, we're talking cutting edge now.
Right.
You're moving ahead into the future, you know. I think we will see, in our lifetime, I think we'll see a lot of progress, you know, in the next 10 years or so. Yeah, it's happening. It's definitely happening.
Well, it's just, you know, it reminds me of the little scrap of pottery that was in the Smithsonian, and they just threw it in a box, so they didn't know what to do with it. And the one Hebrew gentleman looked at it and realized that there was Hebrew from Tennessee. I think it was from Tennessee. And he says, well, this is just upside down. They turn around and it ended up being written in Hebrew. It wasn't a lost language or Native American that they couldn't figure out. It's like, but how did a Hebrew old pottery get to Tennessee?
Well, there's a book out there by a guy called Barry Fell. And I think I'm right in saying it was written in 1977. And as soon as he wrote it, it was banned. And it's called America BC. That's all it's called. Barry Fell, America BC. And if as soon as you start reading that, your head will explode, because it just tells you what's there. You know, they've got Roman shipwrecks, they've got Viking shipwrecks, they've got cuneiform, they've got Egyptian hieroglyphs, they've got Stone Age monuments, they've got Bronze Age axes, there's flint, you know, there's all sorts of stuff, just tons of it. And all he did was he perfectly innocently just went round writing all of this down, you know. I can get a book out of this, you know. Book comes out, wham, that's it, banned straight away. But I've got a copy here. I mean, they're not cheap to get hold of, but I've got one. They are out there.
Wow.
And that's what you want, America BC by Barry Fell. That's just incredible.
That'd be cool. I'll have to try to look that up.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of reminds me, what's the name of that map, Daryl, that they just by chance accidentally found in a church, you know, just kind of put aside somewhere and forgotten about? What's the name of that one map that we were looking at that they found?
The Monday?
Yeah.
The Hertford Monday map? I think.
Can you imagine how many things are just kind of thrown in the back room and forgotten about?
You might be thinking of the Piri Reis map, because the Piri Reis map was thought to have been done by Vikings, Viking sailors, and then it was copied and copied and copied, and eventually it ended up with the Spanish. And the Piri Reis map actually shows Antarctica with no ice on it.
Mm-hmm.
And a bit of South America as well, which it's like, oh, hang on a minute, that's not supposed to be there.
Right along this subject, we're planning on doing a show sometime about Egyptian culture in America, from the Grand Canyon all the way down to the Missouri Valley.
Well, you need to get that book, that America BC by Barry Fell.
Oh, that'd be
there's
interesting.
an entire chapter just on that one subject. So if you get into that really seriously, that will work wonders for you. It will definitely work wonders for you.
Where can we get the book?
Amazon.
Really? So it's still available on Amazon.
Secondhand books. That's the key to it. You'll get it secondhand, but if you put it out there, Barry Fell, America BC, I think it's 1977. I couldn't tell you what the publisher is without going and having a look, but it's well worth having. A lot of the guys that write about, you know, that sort of thing, they use it as a source book, and that's probably why it's not more more widely known, because it's an author's book for authors. You know, it's
we'll have to check that out. That's an interesting subject. I mean, just here in Illinois, I mean, I know we're not talking about giants and angels anymore, but just Illinois itself, the southern part of Illinois is called Little Egypt. It's always been called Little Egypt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's Cairo.
Well, again, we are still on subject, because it's like we mentioned, you know, ages ago, we said, you know, human beings, we underestimate what the human beings in the past were capable of. Well, of course they could sail. Of course they could talk to each other. Of course they can travel from one place to another. I mean, you know, it's been a big thing recently where they've gone, oh, wow, you know, we've got pyramids in China, we've got pyramids in Bulgaria, we've got pyramids in the UK, we've got pyramids in South America, pyramids in Australia, there's pyramids everywhere. Mm-hmm. Well, if everybody can talk to everybody else, that's exactly what you'd expect to see. the same mathematics, the same architecture, the same beliefs, the same ideas behind them. They're going to be everywhere. Whether or not it was pre-flood, though, that is an interesting question. It's interesting to know how much has actually survived from what they call the antediluvian world, the pre-deluge. I think there's quite a bit. But that's the wonder of what we're doing now, the wonder of the internet. Everybody everywhere can tell everybody now what they've got. So, when I was doing archaeology back in the 70s and 80s, I had no idea that the biggest pyramid in the world is where the terracotta warriors are at Siam in China. That's the biggest pyramid. But if somebody had come up to me and gone, hey, you're not going to believe this, we've got pyramids in China, I'd have thought they were nuts. Pyramids are in Egypt, aren't they? Well, no, they're not. They're everywhere. And this is what we're finding more and more with the communication. The guys with the big stretched heads, everywhere. Giants everywhere, fossils everywhere. There's a repeat pattern emerging now, but the pattern has only been possible since we've had the internet. Everybody can talk to everybody else. It's really hard to keep things under wraps now. I as an archaeologist, my profession embarrasses me every day because people don't just come out and go, okay, it's a fair cop. You're right. This is how it is. Everything is connected, etc. People need to come out and say that. And then move on. Let's have a look and find out what's out there,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I bring up all the time that Abraham Lincoln in his speech talks about the giants, when he's there by the mounds, talking about the mounds in America. And that leads us back to Smithsonian Institute, where they've hid the remains of some of these giants, or some of the mounds were destroyed even.
Well, from an archaeologist's point of view, there is an archaeological paper. I think it's called Giants in America, actually. And what they did was they went back, these two guys that were doing the paper, they went back and studied all of the early records of the early digs for people like the mound people. And they're not giants like, 30, 40 foot. They're not that kind of giant. But there were definitely, without a doubt, skeletons bigger than 7 foot. So, like I say, with these heads, stick one of these giant skulls on top, add another couple of feet to that. You're looking at 8 foot, 9 foot. These are big fellas. These are big guys that we're talking about, and that is actually known in the world of archaeology. They just don't talk about it. They don't tell you. But there's papers written on it, it's there. The physical evidence is there. Like you say, Smithsonian and other institutions, they've got them. But again, it just took somebody to come around and actually look at all the details and bring all that information together. But it's out there. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, this is so fascinating. There's so many subjects that are connected. Like we were talking about giants and angels. Yeah, they're kind of connected just because of the biblical verse that we talked about earlier. But at the same time, all these rabbit holes that you lead off of each subject is just so fascinating.
Yeah, they're connected in time and space. They're also connected in archaeology. They're connected through human experience of them, and ancient records, etc. So yeah, absolutely, they're connected without a doubt. And all the little spin-offs we've gone off, we've always managed to come back in this conversation back to either giants or angels or something similar. I think we have stayed very much on topic, but like you say, it's not a topic you can study just like a narrow, corridor type, rabbit hole. You can't study it like that. You need to broaden out and look at the bigger picture. Giants in America, absolutely, without a doubt, but again, it hangs on the definition of a giant. But then if everybody's connected, theoretically, the giants should be everywhere, and they are. They're all over the place.
I was just going to ask you that because we concentrate here on the U.S. giants and, maybe South America, but what about Europe and the rest of the world? I'm sure Russia and all that, they had giants also, I assume.
Well, yeah, the key to it really is the guys with the stretched skulls. If you look at the stretched heads, they are, without a doubt, worldwide. That's a fact. Places like Russia, the Hunnic race and Genghis Khan and all his lot, they had these guys with the enormous heads. They were actually trading the ladies with the big heads. They were trading them into Europe as late as the 13 and 1400s. So they were alive, only 400, 500 years ago, these guys with the big heads. So when you start looking at that and the interrelation of species at that level, then apply that to giants, apply that to the giant version of humanity. Well, of course they were everywhere. You're going back a bit further. You're going to have to go back perhaps another 1,000 years to get the last of them. But yeah, they're everywhere, and there was no calendar back then. I mean, we're looking at, BC or BCE and AD, we're looking at these different time periods, and our period is 2,000 years. But if you'd have gone back in time and talked to the giants, it was just like, well, you've only got yesterday, today, and tomorrow. That's your time scale.
Right.
If you see what I mean. So, the guys with the big heads were not so long ago, and the giants were a bit further back than that, a bit more long ago than that. You've got to sort of lose this, counting the years, and it's all about numbers and what century are we in, and that doesn't really apply. It's how recent was it?
Or you talk to somebody like me, say, well, just the other day. Well, really, it wasn't the other day. It was like 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
Oh, we're obsessed with numbers, and time periods. And, you go back like 200 or 300 years, they didn't care. They didn't care back then. Time was irrelevant. So when we start looking at ancient history and you're looking at these older races, it's more to do with, because you never know when the last one dies out, You automatically assume, for example, that woolly mammoths were extinct, years ago, hundreds, tens of thousands of years ago. The last woolly mammoths only died when they were building the pyramids. But we didn't know that because they died on an island. They died in the middle of nowhere. But that's not that long ago. Do you see what I mean? Do away with all the stupid dates and all the trying to get your head around time periods and kingdoms and empires and all that. Forget all that. It's not all that long ago. The pyramids are relatively recent in terms of archaeological history. Well, there were still woolly mammoths around at that point, which is why they keep turning up in the ice, frozen or what have you, because they're not quite as old as we originally thought. And there's all sorts of stuff like that turning up. Giants fall in to the same category as that. If you've got giant flora and you've got giant fauna, you've got giant mammoths that we know and giant warm-blooded creatures that have gone extinct within historical times, which we know all that's happened, then it's reasonable that the giant humans were part of that. That's the environment that we're looking at. They were part of that, which, like I say, in terms of planet Earth, it's not that long ago. It's only yesterday.
Well, we like studying old world buildings. Some people call it Tartaria. We're kind of calling it old world. Look at all the giant doors. And I mean, that's obvious. There was something huge not too long ago that needed access to a giant door. And then you go inside and all the massive high ceilings. Well, there had to have been giants just not too long ago.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at that, good point. Absolutely valid point. The only thing with the Tartaria thing that worries me is that it's become so popular that people are using AI and CGI and all sorts of stuff. And it's like, you're diving into a pond full of mud. Yes, there's something in there somewhere, and you're absolutely right. The bigger buildings, the bigger structures, which I mentioned earlier on, the things that were built in ways that we can't build them quite clearly. And some of those have clearly survived the flood. Sphinx in Egypt is a good example of that. It's water worn. Last time any water was in the desert was 10,500 BC. So, clearly it's an old structure. And when you're looking at things like that, that's like, that's proper archaeology science, archaeoscience. It's like, you can't really argue with that. Bigger buildings, bigger doors, bigger roofs, bigger blocks, bigger structures. I mean, I've wandered around parts of Egypt. I've done the old, all the sites up the Nile and what have you. There's some big stuff out there. Yeah, really big stuff. That obelisk in the quarry in Aswan, the one that's cracked, and they didn't lift it. They just left it where it was because it cracked. I've stood on that. It's huge. I can't tell you how big it is. And you look at it and you think, how are they going to get it out? It's down a hole. How on earth did they decide they were going to move this? And then the guide, the little guide that's wandering around, just casually happens to mention that once upon a time, where you're standing now, which is on this obelisk, was inside a mountain of granite that stretched 3.5 miles to the Nile.
Wow.
At which point your head just goes, okay, where's that 3.5 miles worth of granite gone? They've moved it. They've chopped the mountain away and shifted it, which again is back to what I was saying in what we said in the past. It's not always about what's there. Sometimes it's about what's not there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a mountain that's gone. It's not there anymore. The Egyptians used all that stone and they moved it. They shifted it hundreds of miles. So yeah, there's a lot going on. So there is it's worth investigating. I'm going to say that it's worth having a look at some of those issues that have come up in the Tartaria bracket. It's worth looking at them with an open mind. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, we used to call it Tartaria, but if you look at the old world maps, that's mainly around Russia. So that's the old world. There's definitely an old world civilization that they hid from us, and they're calling medieval.
Yeah. Well, that label Tartaria, there was a kingdom known as that was Southern Russian, and that's just been expanded. The bit that I think they're really keeping from us, the bit that they're not being honest about, is what's happening before the flood. In the old days, Atlantean, what have you, and all that sort of stuff. That's how it used to be known. That is a huge area that I think science, technology, Google Earth that can see things on, satellite photography. The fact we can now X-ray the ground, we can X-ray the oceans, we can X-ray the ice. It's throwing up so much stuff that in the past they were always like, no, we're not going to talk about that. Not happening. Mm-hmm. Now it's the other way around. They're having a hell of a job to keep a lid on it. It's just coming out. I always think of that woman that I can't remember her name now, but she hijacked. I think it must have been she officially hijacked an infrared military satellite. I think she's actually American as well, I think. and she flew it over Egypt looking at the desert. And she said, this infrared, what have you, will show you where all the buildings are, and things in ancient Egypt. So she flew it over the desert. And all of a sudden, where we were thinking there were about, maybe 300,000 people living there, there's probably, whatever it is, 26 pyramids or whatever. Anyway, she flies over it. She finds another 18 pyramids that nobody knew existed. And the estimated population of Egypt goes up to 3.4 million. Because that's how many buildings she found. She's finding entire towns and villages, and they go right out into the desert. Just because they're not there now doesn't mean they weren't there in the past. And that's what technology is doing. The Amazon, go down to the southern parts of the Americas and have a look at what's coming up in the jungle. Absolutely incredible. The cities, the roads, everything that we've assumed where there's, we've assumed there was nothing. Well, actually, no, it's the opposite way around. There's not an inch of ground that hasn't had something on it at some point. And it's all coming out. It's all coming out now. So giants, angels, we're still on topic. Why not? It's ancient world, old world stuff,
Yeah, that goes back to what you said before. Says, how do we know what kind of technology and information they had? If we're finding these areas that had old civilizations and roads and buildings, I mean, my gosh, we didn't think they existed. So how do we know what kind of technology and information they had?
Well, yeah, you had the famous, it's still on topic, the whole pyramid thing, where I think it was Robert Bauval that came up with the Orion mystery, when he suddenly noticed that the pyramids actually correspond to the planets on Orion's belt, which in itself, that's an amazing discovery. But then since that book's come out, they've discovered that actually the whole of Egypt is a star map. All the sites on the Nile all correspond. So the idea of as above, so below, somehow, don't ask me how, but the people that did it, they knew where the stars were in the sky, and they built an entire kingdom on planet Earth that corresponds to the stars. And then it gets even more interesting, because somehow, I don't know how they did it, they managed to work out what the total dry land surface area of planet Earth was. They calculated where the central point of planet Earth is on dry land. So that's going that way and going that way. They worked out where the central point is, and it's the Great Pyramid of Cheops on Giza.
Oh my.
It sits bang in the middle, absolutely bullseye in the middle of the entire landmass of planet Earth. Now, when you get to that point, you know, Elvis has left the building. It's just, where are we?
I think Elvis has left the planet.
Well, yeah. Yeah, as they say in that movie, he's not dead. He's just gone home.
That's right.
So
yeah, along that way of Orion, other civilizations have planned out their things by Orion or constellations. That Canadian boy that was ridden to his bed for a while because he was sick. He took the South American temples and put Orion to it and discovered some new temples and new buildings.
Just going to say that the same thing they did in Egypt, they then moved on to doing with the Aztecs and Mayans. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, no doubt about that whatsoever. So these guys, I mean, you're talking about the technology they had in those days, in the ancient days, was actual functioning, you know, factually based earth and sky technology. That's what it was. You know, it was for real. It was tangible. It was buildings and stone circles and how you did things in certain ways. Back to what I was saying about the Native American Indians, you know, they can live for 300 years in the same location and they'd just vanish and you'd never know they were there because they're in harmony with the environment they're in. You know, their technology was such that they could do that. And that's when you're an archaeologist, you find that right across the board. You know, the Celts are doing it, the Aborigines are doing it, you know, the Aztecs and Mayans are doing it. Just everybody does that. They're living in harmony with the environment. I mean, some people say, well, you know, I wonder if the ancient Egyptians ever discovered nuclear technology. Well, I'm always thinking, well, if they did, they probably looked at it and thought, we're not going to do that because it's too dangerous. You see where I'm coming from?
Yeah.
Just because they didn't do it doesn't mean they didn't have it. Doesn't mean they didn't know about it. You know, they knew about electricity, they knew about radiation, they knew how life came into being, they knew about stars, they knew about so many things, but they just did something with it different to the way we do it. You know, they were an awful lot less destructive. They understood it and they knew how to use it, you know. But if you've got giants, you've got these guys with the big heads that are like walking around with supercomputers on the shoulders, you know, all these different species who all have different skills, they do different things. It must have been incredible. You know, it was a totally different world, like a Star Wars galaxy. That's what it must have been like. And now, dare I say it, we're just stuck with us. You know, we're it.
You know, it makes you wonder, you know, maybe they didn't think it was worth writing it down. Maybe it was so commonplace for them to have some of this stuff. It wasn't no big deal. I mean, just like us, you know, we could discover something or come up with something new that we do that nobody else does, but we don't think it's anything weird or different. Yeah. So we don't write stuff down from our lives. At least I don't.
Yeah.
So,
well, you're back to those scrolls that were found at Pompeii. You know, boom, off goes the volcano. Wham! The whole lot's gone. Everything's gone. The contents of it are gone. So you know, we've got the famous dinosaur killer meteorite. You know, the thing that came in, or asteroid, or whatever you want to call it, and smacked into planet Earth, and it wipes out all these different species of dinosaurs. That impact crater is the Gulf of Mexico. And when you actually piece all the continents back together again, the Pangea, the big prehistoric continent, that impact is right in the middle. So it got smacked by something really big, and then all the continents start to float away. And they're still doing it now. They're still floating away now from each other. That's continental drift. Well, back to your observation, what happens to all the information? You know, wham, the whole lot's gone. Disappeared. Well, if that happened more than once, because we know it happened more than once, there's another crater 3 times the size of that under Antarctica, under the ice. But we've had it happen a few times. Well, we are the survivors. You know, we're not some super race. You know, we're not phenomenal. We're not the best we've ever been. We're just what's left. You know, that's what we are. You know.
Yeah. Wow.
Survival of not so much survival of the fittest. I think it's survival of the most aggressive species. I think that's what we are. I think we outstripped for survival. We outstripped so many other species. We're still doing it now anyway. We're losing a phenomenal number of species every year now. Things are most definitely decreasing. Poor old Darwin now would be turning in his grave because evolution has just gone. Nothing's evolving, you know. Everything's just going, and that's it. You know, we're devolving. We're winding down, if anything, you know. Again, conversation we've had tonight. Angels, you don't see as many of them. You know, you wouldn't know where they were. They don't appear as much as they used to do, clearly. And giants are gone. You know, we don't even have them. You know. Good case in point. You know, there's the evidence.
Well, I think that's a good line to end our show on, Mark. I think I don't know if we can go any further. Well, we probably could, but
Well, this is part one. We're going to come back with crop circles and all kinds of interesting things.
Skulls and all kinds of stuff. We'll have to bring you back for more.
Yeah. Well, like you say, if you send me an email to the address I've sent you, I'll send you a list and we'll get started. We'll see where it takes us.
All right.
That would be awesome. Thank you.
Well, don't leave quite yet. I know it's getting late over there, but don't leave quite yet. We'll just say goodbye to everybody, and then we'll talk to you a little bit. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I love the chat. Oh, I do have one. I think she had to leave, but let me see.
Oh, questions. That's
she asked, "What's the most surprising find you found?"
Good question.
Okay, I've got two answers, and you're going to love this. Not necessarily on topic, but there are two answers to that question. It's a good question. Number one, I'm stood on the island of Malta. I'm looking at a prehistoric temple. I think it was Gigantiga, which is this big prehistoric, you know, megalithic structure. I'm looking at this thing, and on the date panel for this thing, it says this is like, you know, whatever, 30,000 BC. You know, it's old. This thing's old, this temple. And I happened to look down on the floor, and there's a thing called an Acheulean hand axe, which is this teardrop-shaped axe. They're made in North Africa. In the pavement that I'm standing on. It's in the dirt. And people are walking over this hand axe, and it's about 4 inches below the level of this Gigantiga. And I picked it up, and that is about 300,000 BC. That is really old. Wow. And I'm looking at this thing and I'm thinking, that temple is a lot older than people think it is, because it was built on top of this axe. This axe is stuck under the front bit of the temple. Now, I've still got the axe because, ironically, the archaeological services on Malta didn't want it. But that is a pretty amazing find. I'm just looking at it going, I can't believe that. Nobody's going to believe me when I get this thing home. You know, it's one of those things. The other find, I found in a friend's garage, but he found it in a field in Wales, a farmer's field. So he's working his way through this farmer's field. He gets into the forest. Stuck in a tree in front of him is a piece of metal. And it's a piece of metal off a UFO, unidentified flying object. He's got about 6 of these pieces of metal. And I've got 1 tiny fragment of this piece of metal. And he kept them all in a box in his garage. And that's where Europe's Roswell, that book that I mentioned at the very beginning, that 40 years since impact, that's where that book comes from. It shows you all the debris and it gives you the full account of that. So there's your 2 answers. That's pretty amazing, really. Most archaeologists probably couldn't tell you that. So one is a proper serious piece of archaeology that rewrites the history of Malta, and the other one is a piece of a flying saucer of some kind, a UFO.
That's awesome.
That's amazing.
Since you brought up your book, why don't you go ahead for people who may be tuning in later, just got here, about your Facebook and your books.
I could do that. Yeah, it's only a short advert, so I can do that. If anybody wants to see what I'm all about, go and have a look at YouTube. Type in my name, which is there, and Mark Olly, and just see what comes up. You'll get all sorts of stuff. If you add Lost Treasures, you'll get the TV series. I believe, actually, the Crop Circles clip that I did for Ancient Aliens is on there as well. You'll get loads of stuff. You'll be able to spend like 10, 20, 30 hours going through all this loads. Go and have a nosy on YouTube. If you want any books, that's the second one. Amazon. Everything's on Amazon, all of them. Robin Hood, King Arthur, Disappearing Ninth Legion, The Green Man. I've met all the ones I've mentioned tonight. Europe's Roswell. They're all on there, literally. So you just literally click them and they come through your door a few days later. If you want to come and find me, For me, it's dead easy. I'm on Facebook. I'm not on anything else, just Facebook. Send me a friend request, and as long as you're a real person, which we said earlier on, as long as you're not a photo of a bear, you know, and a rainbow in the background, and you know, as long as it's real, I'll accept you. So you really only got those three things. You've got YouTube, you've got Amazon, and you've got Facebook. Come and find me.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was really interesting. I can tell the chat really enjoyed it.
Excellent. It's been a pleasure.
Fantastic show. I just love this stuff so much. It's fascinating. The stuff that this stuff, once you bring up a subject, this comes to mind, you know, like questions or what ifs. And it's just amazing to sit here and talk about it.
Have an open mind about it.
Well, if anyone's got any questions, I mean, if I come back, if they tune in again, they can throw more questions in, and I will take on all comers.
All right.
If there's an answer, I'll try and find it.
All right. Like we said, don't go anywhere. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We love you all. Stay tuned for more Mark Olly. He'll be back with us, I'm sure, and we'll do some more subjects. So thank you for coming and checking out our special time that we did today for Piercing the Veil. So we're just so glad that all these people joined in with us, and we will see you next time. Keep looking up.
Keep your vibrations high.
Night, everybody. Or
Much
afternoon,
love,
wherever
everyone.
you're at.
Big hugs.